Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story from a close friend who lives in South America. Not my story, hers. This happened about 5 years ago. My friend, let's call her Sophia, had been dating a guy named Lucas for almost 3 years when she discovered through the local grapevine, if you've ever lived in a small town, you'll understand, that Lucas had cheated on her. He'd gone to a house party, gotten a girl drunk, and slept with her. News of his actions spread like wildfire, as gossip tends to do. The worst part was that it seemed this wasn't his first rodeo by a long shot. When Sophia heard about it, she decided to plot her revenge. She texted Lucas, inviting him over to her apartment for a special afternoon of fun with her and her friend Camila. Lucas, unable to resist the temptation, agreed immediately. "Hey babe," Sophia wrote. "Want to come over for some fun with me and Camila?" "Hell yeah," Lucas replied. "When?" "This afternoon, around 3. I'll be there." Picture the scene. Lucas enters Sophia's building, gets into the elevator to go up to the 8th floor where her apartment is. He rings the doorbell, hearing music playing from inside. Sophia opens the door, and he walks in to find both his girlfriend and Camila wearing sexy silk negligees. Sophia holds up a blindfold, grinning mischievously. "Ready for some fun?" Lucas nods eagerly. "You bet I am." "Put this on," Sophia says, handing him the blindfold, "and strip. Everything off." While Lucas was busy undressing, Camila quietly put her clothes back on and slipped out of the apartment, leaving a doorstop to keep the door open. She called the elevator, then returned to grab Lucas's clothes, tossing them out the window into the parking lot below. She then left the apartment and descended the stairs, ringing doorbells as she went down. Meanwhile, Sophia had been leading Lucas around the apartment, disorienting him with twists and turns. Finally, she guided him out of the apartment and closed the door behind her. She got into the elevator alone, calling out, "Hey, unfaithful a-hole, your clothes are in the parking lot," before the doors closed. Lucas yanked off the blindfold, the realization of his predicament hitting him like a ton of bricks. He found himself standing naked in the hallway, faced with the daunting task of walking down 8 flights of stairs, passing bemused and laughing neighbors along the way. "Sophia, Camila," he called out, panic rising in his voice. "This isn't funny!" But there was no response, just the sound of doors opening and curious voices murmuring. "Oh my God!" a woman's voice came from down the hall. "Is that Lucas?" "Holy crap, it is," a man replied, laughing. "Dude, what happened?" Red-faced and mortified, Lucas had no choice but to make his way down the stairs, trying in vain to cover himself as he passed floor after floor of gawking residents. When he finally reached the parking lot, a small crowd had gathered to watch him collect his scattered clothes and dress himself, adding a final touch of humiliation to his ordeal. Sophia never saw Lucas again after that day, but the story of his walk of shame became legendary in their small town. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd be writing one of these stories, but here I am. It all started last summer when my wife and I decided to install a pool in our backyard. We'd been saving up for years, and with the kids getting older, we figured it was the perfect time. Little did I know, this decision would lead to a nightmare scenario with our neighbor Karen. Now, Karen had always been a bit of a pain. She'd complain about the smallest things, our grass being too long, our trash cans being visible from the street, you name it. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened after we put in that pool. The installation went smoothly, and for the first few weeks, everything was great. The kids were having a blast, and even my wife and I were enjoying some relaxing evenings by the water. Then, one Saturday afternoon, while we were all out swimming, Karen marched into our backyard like she owned the place. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that always set my teeth on edge. "I need you all to get out of my pool right now." I thought I must have misheard her. "I'm sorry, what?" "This is my pool now," Karen said, as if she were explaining something to a child. "I've decided to expand my property line, and this area now belongs to me, so I'll need you to vacate immediately." I looked at my wife, who seemed just as confused as I was. The kids had stopped splashing around and were staring at Karen with wide eyes. "Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I don't know what you're talking about, but this is our property. We paid for this pool, and it's definitely not yours." Her face twisted into a scowl. "Well, I've decided it is, and if you don't get out right now, I'm calling the police and having you arrested for trespassing." At this point, I was getting angry. "Karen, you need to leave, now. This is our property, and you're the one who's trespassing." She pulled out her phone. "That's it. I'm calling the police." I couldn't believe what was happening. As Karen dialed, I told my wife to take the kids inside and grab our property documents. I wasn't about to let this crazy woman steal our pool. When the police arrived, Karen immediately started spinning her tale. According to her, she had acquired the part of our yard with the pool through some kind of adverse possession claim. She even had a crudely drawn map that she claimed proved her case. The officers looked skeptical, but they had to take her complaint seriously. That's when my wife came out with our property documents, including the recent permits for the pool installation. "Officers," I said, "we have all the paperwork here showing that this is our property. We just installed this pool a few weeks ago. Karen has no claim to it whatsoever." The police reviewed our documents and then turned to Karen. "Ma'am, it's clear that this property belongs to your neighbors. You need to leave now, or we'll have to arrest you for trespassing." Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. "This is outrageous! I'll sue all of you!" As the police escorted her off our property, I thought that would be the end of it. But oh, how wrong I was. Over the next few weeks, Karen escalated her campaign against us. She'd stand at the edge of her property, shouting insults whenever we used the pool. She called the city multiple times, claiming we didn't have the proper permits. We did. She even tried to convince other neighbors that we had stolen her land. The final straw came when we woke up one morning to find our pool had been emptied overnight. Security camera footage showed Karen sneaking into our yard with a pump, draining the entire pool. That was it. We'd had enough. We called our lawyer and filed for a restraining order against Karen. We also pressed charges for trespassing and vandalism. The day of the court hearing, Karen showed up with a stack of papers she claimed proved her ownership of our pool. The judge took one look at her evidence. A mixture of printed Google Maps screenshots with hand-drawn property lines and some kind of homemade deed she had created, and dismissed her case immediately. "Mrs. Thompson," the judge said sternly, "not only do you have no claim to your neighbor's property, but your actions constitute harassment and vandalism. I'm granting the restraining order against you, and you'll be required to pay restitution for the damage to the pool." Karen's face fell as the judge continued. "Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Your behavior is completely unacceptable." As we left the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Karen was ordered to stay at least 100 feet away from our property at all times and had to pay for the pool to be refilled and any damage repaired. In the weeks that followed, we hardly saw Karen. Word got around the neighborhood about what had happened, and suddenly all those neighbors she had tried to turn against us were coming by to apologize and offer support. We ended up installing a taller fence around our yard and adding extra security cameras just to be safe. It's sad that we had to go to such lengths, but the peace of mind is worth it. As for Karen, last I heard, she was trying to sell her house. Apparently, living next to the pool she couldn't have was too much for her to bear. Can't say I'm sorry to see her go. Looking back, I still can't believe how quickly a simple home improvement project turned into a suburban nightmare. But in the end, justice prevailed and our family can enjoy our pool in peace. And if there's one lesson I've learned from all this, it's to always keep your property documents handy. You never know when a crazy neighbor might try to claim your backyard as their own. The next one is a petty revenge story. During the first year of COVID lockdowns, everyone was trying to buy home gym equipment. I was so angry that people were marking up brand new weights and bars 3 to 4x just to make a profit. Every now and then, the local sporting goods store would get a shipment of plates and bars totaling 300 bulbs. I think the deal was $250. Every time I went to the store, they were sold out. I would search Craigslist and I saw the brand new set I was looking for being offered at $850. This guy even took a picture of the same set still in the shopping cart from the same store. It pissed me off that there were lines outside of the sporting goods store with some of those people just trying to rip people off during a pandemic. I decided to respond to the ad, and at first it was full of anger asking why they wanted to rip people off and to get a real job. The guy told me to duck off and just lift bricks or go buy my own set for $250. So I created another email address and responded to the same ad. I asked if he could meet me somewhere because I was interested. He told me he got off work at 4 and would have to load the weights into his truck. He kept asking for my phone number, and I said I'll reply with it when it gets closer to 4 p.m. I never did include my phone number, but kept telling him I'd meet him in a mall parking lot. I chose a place about 25 minutes away from where he was located, and close to me just so I knew he would have to drive a decent amount. I responded to him through Craigslist and told him I was running 15 to 20 min late, but on my way, and asked what car I should look for. I wanted to waste more of his time, too. Knowing what car it was, I drove by and saw him waiting outside his SUV with the hatch up and the 300 box of weights and Olympic bar. I sent a final email to him saying, "Hey, sorry I drove by the sporting goods store on the way and just found the same set you're selling on sale for $250. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Backstory: I used to work in hotels years ago. The hotel I worked at has a policy where there must be at least one staff member at the hotel 24/7. I worked the unenviable but fireproof position of part-time front desk and relief night audit, so I never knew when I was going to be working. 16-hour shifts were uncommon but expected of me when the main night audit called in sick. The story: I had a middle manager who got bored and liked to ruffle feathers for entertainment. Annoying, but I only had to deal with it for 2 to 3 days a week because no one else wants to cover the night audit, so I suck it up and deal. They also loved to sleep in and would routinely call in late in the mornings. I really couldn't stand them, but they were my boss. So after giving the essential information and passed the torch from the night audit to the morning manager and crew, I clocked out promptly and got out of the line of fire. So I thought. I get a call waking me up at 11 a.m. because I was sleeping off my graveyard shift that night. I was told to report to the hotel for a disciplinary meeting that includes middle manager and the general manager of the hotel, my boss's boss. I asked them what the meeting was about, and they replied that it was due to my excessive use of overtime. I then asked them if I could come in before my shift that night so that I could actually get some sleep for my next graveyard shift. They replied that I would have to arrive within the hour. Took me 30 minutes to drive to get there. Or they would tack on insubordination or some other nonsense to my file as well. I needed the job for rent, so I complied and got to the hotel half asleep. As I am driving, I am trying to figure out how to explain away the nice overtime additions on my paycheck. Took me a solid 10 minutes, but I remembered that the middle manager had yet to actually show up on time for the past month. That wakes me up more, and I show up to the meeting absolutely cheerful and smiling, much to the displeasure of the GM and my boss. Boss goes on a tirade about how abusing company time is horrible in many different ways. I no longer have my crap-eating grin, but I am also unfazed by the dressing down and let them blow out their steam that was likely put on them by payroll or HR about how my paychecks were getting too fat for their liking. This is confirmed by a shorter but more professional dress-inf down by my GM about me costing the company excess money and that I should know better because I run the hotel's books. I calmly state that all of the overtime statements were true, and that I would like to compare my punch times to the staffing schedule and the start/end times of the people I was relieving in the evening and who was relieving me in the morning. I explained to them that I was only staying on until the next crew relieved me, and I had sufficient time to brief the incoming crew, per the corporate policy of the hotel must be manned 24/7. They do and see that there is only a 3 to 5 minute overlap between my shift and the person relieving me. GM looks pissed, and middle manager went from smug to looking like they got their hand caught in the cookie jar as their clock-ins showed usually 7-ish and sometimes even 7:30 when their start time was 6. I was then told by the GM that they would reimburse me for the minutes to drive to and from the hotel, as well as the duration of the meeting, and that the write-up was being dropped in light of new information. Fallout. Middle manager still made my life miserable until I left, but at least they never gave me grief about overtime after that and actually started showing up to work at 6 a.m. and not snooze until 7. My paychecks were less, but at least I got more sleep because I was now better able to beat the morning commute at the end of my shift. The next one is an entitled people story. This happened several years ago when I worked as a construction project manager for a company that serviced retail POS systems. The job was for everything from add/remove a register to installing all of the electronics in a newly constructed store. One year I took camping off-road vacation in a remote area and was supposed to meet some friends. They called me to inform me they were about 6 hours late. Since I knew some people at the local grocery store I had recently finished doing the IT remodeling for, I walked over to say hi. When I got there, I found that half of their front end was down. The manager asked if I could help, and since I was just killing time, I told him yes if my boss approved the OT. Anyone who worked in the field was paid hourly. The OT was approved, and it quickly became apparent that the issue was that the cleaning contractor had dismantled registers, violating their contract the night before to make it easier to clean. I fixed all but 2 lanes, and those had damaged power and data cables. I told the manager I could fix them with parts from the local True Value and Radio Shack if he would reimburse me. I also asked if I could park my truck in the vendor-only spot, since his parking lot was full and I would need some tools I carried in my truck. He agreed, so I got my truck, picked up the items I needed, and parked in the vendor spot. This is important. Both registers needed the cabinets dismantled in order to get to replace the damaged cables. I fixed the first lane and got it operational. Then I moved to the second lane, which was right in front of the customer service desk. I made sure the closed sign was up and had a 6-wheeled cart that was loaded with a special order placed to block the register. I was lying under the register belt in order to connect the new cables to the register base when someone kicked me. They kicked me again, so I lashed out with a steel-toed boot and hit a Karen in the knee, dropping her screaming briefly as she was knocked out when she hit her head on the cart she had moved. What happened was she decided that my lane should be open, moved the cart, tossed the closed sign on the floor, and kicked me for ignoring her. What she failed to notice was that there was a local cop at the customer service desk asking if they wanted the lifted truck in the vendor spot ticketed. The manager was directing him to where I was to see if it was mine, and they both saw the woman kicking me. The cop called an ambulance for Karen and then asked if I wanted to press charges, which I did. The store also pressed charges, as she had been banned and was violating a no trespass order. She later pled guilty to the trespass and a misdemeanor assault charge after being informed that a police officer witnessed the attack and security camera recorded it. My employer's legal team informed me that I was being subpoenaed for a deposition because she was suing both companies for compensation for my having broken her kneecap and giving her a concussion. A week later, I was told this was canceled, as the judge had dismissed the case with prejudice due to her having initiated the violence according to the police report. The next one is an entitled parent's story. For context, everything here are real thoughts, 24M, immigrants, Christian household. So for starters, I'm the only child in the family. I have a business of my own. We'll get to this. Unmarried, I work all the time. Pretty successful business, so for some time I've been noticing I'm emotionally unavailable. More like, I refuse to talk about how I feel, don't want to express anything out loud, etc. I'm not stupid or scared, I simply don't care enough about many things at this point. I rather walk away than actually speak up. It's that draining. 2 to 3 years ago, I was the very loud and put-spoken one. If I thought everyone would know. Not anymore. I have noticed I refuse to come home. I live with both my parents. I rather do anything else but be at home. Even time I come home semi-early, it's always an argument, it's always something we need to discuss, something we need to share away. It's something rude, disrespectful, I have said. It's literally always something, especially from my mother's side. According to her, I don't talk to her, don't let her in, etc. Every time I do want to ask a 30-second question, it turns into a 20-minute monologue with herself or a life session of where I'm in TR wrong. Having said that, I obviously love my parents and I will support them no matter what, in their older years and financially anyways they need me. But I don't get the same back. All I get back is, you did it to yourself. We raised you better. It's because of... Anytime I ask for life advice, it turns into a life moral lesson and about where I'm wrong. It's always something I have done at one point or another. I did have a very wild point of my life before I came back to church. Basically, I'm at fault and that's that. Being at home is mentally, emotionally draining. I'm not a believer of, oh, I got depression is real, but not, in a healthy 23-year-old guy, LOL. But being around my own 2 parents is just causing me to lose my mood. Emotionally, I turn off soon as they're in the room. Any other time I go out, I'm taking care of my own things, I'm completely fine. Friends have even noticed this in me too. I work full-time with one of my parents, we working together, we do business together, we live together. That also is draining, there's no difference to him if it's 11 p.m. or Sunday or I'm at home or I'm out work. And life balance is non-existent, but we do work in a very demanding industry. I understand. Don't do business with friends nor family, LOL. I have 12 people on the team, I don't have a problem with no one. But always something to figure out with my parent, something I've done wrong or didn't do, etc. His English is very bad. I do a lot of the language required work, accounting, safety, legal, insurance, negotiations, hiring, firing, payroll, taxes, all paperwork, meetings, etc. He of course does his fair share of work that doesn't require English as much. Moving out of the house, it doesn't make any sense financially speaking. I work 12, 18 hours a day anyways. I don't care where I sleep, even if it's on your couch in the basement, I'll be fine. So moving out is pointless for someone like me. Having said all of this, not even sure why I'm exactly here. Anyone know if aunt tips tricks? Maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe there's something I'm not understanding. I have tried to bring it up to my mother. Answer is, we're the parents, we know better. Or, if you wouldn't be so disrespectful, we wouldn't have been here. The next one is an entitled people's story. I recently purchased my dream house after spending years in a cramped apartment. It was a beautiful property, though it needed some renovations before I could move in. Despite the temporary inconvenience, I was thrilled about the prospect of having my own space. Finally free from the limitations of apartment living, the neighborhood seemed welcoming, with friendly faces eager to greet me. One particular neighbor, Sophie, took an interest in making me feel at home. She invited me to a neighborhood party she planned to host the following month. Another couple, Karen and Steve, seemed friendly enough, but I sensed something off about them. They were overly curious about my moving in plans and the contractors working on my house. However, I dismissed my suspicions as mere curiosity. As the renovations progressed, unbeknownst to me, Karen and Steve devised a scheme to take advantage of my absence. They manipulated the situation, convincing the contractors that they were extended family members helping me prepare a surprise for my move-in. Sadly, the contractors fell for their ruse, allowing them access to my house without my knowledge. Karen and Steve wasted no time in turning my home into their personal party venue. Their friends left behind a mess, staining surfaces and leaving trash scattered throughout. Instead of cleaning up, they treated my house as a storage unit, dumping their old furniture, clothes, and other miscellaneous items inside. The neglect extended to their neglected pets, which they left behind to soil the floors and further damage the house. To add insult to injury, they parked their vehicles on my lawn and driveway, ruining the grass and leaving even more trash behind. Thankfully, Sophie grew suspicious of their behavior and contacted me, urging me to take action. Overwhelmed with anger, I realized I couldn't confront them alone. Concerned for my safety, I decided to involve the authorities. I called the police to report the illegal activities taking place in my home. Additionally, I arranged for a tow company to remove the vehicles parked on my property. When the officers arrived, I explained the situation and showed them the evidence of Karen and Steve's unauthorized occupancy and the damage they caused. Karen and Steve vehemently denied any wrongdoing, claiming I had given them permission. Thankfully, the police saw through their lies and supported my claims. I decided to press charges, but I also hatched a plan for a more satisfying form of retribution. While cleaning up the mess they left behind, I discovered drug paraphernalia and a strong smell of marijuana permeating the house. I saw an opportunity to gather evidence of their involvement in illicit activities. I discreetly observed their interactions, capturing incriminating footage of drug transactions and drug use on their own property. One fateful evening, they carelessly left the garage door open while getting high, unaware that I was vigilantly watching. Seizing the opportunity, I immediately alerted the police to their ongoing illegal activities. The officers swiftly arrived and apprehended Karen and Steve, collecting evidence to support their arrest. The consequence of their actions extended beyond my personal vendetta. It turned out that Karen and Steve's drug involvement was far more severe than anticipated. Their arrest led to the discovery of a larger drug operation, resulting in the loss of their home and custody of their neglected pets. With justice prevailing, I decided to take legal action to recover the damages they caused while invading my home. Meanwhile, I rescued one of their mistreated dogs and provided her with the love and care she deserved. As for Karen and Steve, their misguided attempt to exploit me became their greatest downfall. Messing with me turned out to be their worst decision, as the consequences of their actions engulfed their lives. In the end, my new home became a symbol of resilience, and I vowed to protect it from any further intrusions. The next one is a pro-revenge story. The year was 2008, and I was 9 years into operating a landscape company. I had done moderately well for myself, being able to purchase a home, pay off student loans, and start a family. I employed 4 people during what I call the work season, which for us is March through November. From December through February, we lay off our workers and go on hiatus for the most part. A side note, our company focused mainly on maintenance, and in the Pacific Northwest, Once all the leaves are picked up from autumn, there really isn't much maintenance to be done. That year, I had developed a relationship with a home builder who hired me to care for his personal home and very much liked our work. He asked us to start bidding on installing the landscapes for the homes he built. Sounds easy, right? Well, remember, we focused mainly on maintenance, so my crew didn't have a ton of experience in the detailed installation of landscapes. Also, the homes this guy built were not tract homes or your cookie-cutter type neighbors you find in the suburbs. No, a small home for him was 3,500 square feet on a 25,000 square feet lot, and an average size he developed was an 8,500 to 10,000 square feet home with all the bells and whistles. He was more generous in his landscape budgets than many of the contractors I'd met, and we were off to what I had hoped would be a great partnership. We finished the first 4 projects he handed us, and it was now the beginning of December when my maintenance side of things dropped off. This home builder came to me and asked if I would like to keep my maintenance crew working for the winter, working for him. I knew his next home project wasn't set to break ground until late January, so I asked what he had in mind. He told me that he and his son had been experimenting with spray foam insulation in their homes, and had decided to invest in purchasing equipment to start their own company. To purchase the equipment on this level was about $100,000. I said I would talk to the crew and get back to him. The next week we signed a contract to work with him for 3 months at a specified pay rate for 5 of us. He was confident he had enough work to keep us busy for the next 3 months. The first job was insulating this incredible house for a plastic surgeon who spared no expense for the gadgets and materials that he put into his home. The next job was government buildings on Fort Lewis, followed by new apartment complexes and so on. Now, this builder, who I was friends with, was not my day-to-day boss while insulating. It was his son, who is younger than I and a bit of a jerk. But we got along fine, and all seemed well. The father owned the insulation company, but had very little to do with it on a day-to-day basis. I hardly saw him for 3 months. Now, being a contractor myself, I was used to not getting paychecks every 2 weeks like most working folks. I would get paid once a month from my maintenance accounts for the previous month of service, and it didn't all come in at once. Sometimes people forget to pay on time. However, my crew was used to getting paid in a timely manner, and after the first month of work, and receiving no check from my new boss, I inquired when to expect a check. He assured me that once the checks started rolling in, we would see our money. I totally get how that works, especially for a new company trying to get off the ground. So I paid my guys to keep the peace on my end, and my boss and I worked out an agreement that I would keep track of everything paid and he would cut me a check once he was able to. I also had an outstanding landscape invoice with the father of over $10,000 that I wasn't really worried about because he was not always super quick about payment. Not that I had to hound him about it, but you understand. Now we are at the end of February 2009, and it was time to gear up for the new season of landscape maintenance and put my crew back to work outside. Still, no payment from insulation or the last landscape project. Things got ugly real fast as I started daily phone calls to the son, now that we didn't see each other as often. I called the father, who more or less ignored me. The son stopped answering my calls, texts, etc. The father never had a straight answer for me. Now, mid-April 2009, most communication has stopped on their end. I filed a contractor's lien on the landscape project to be paid out before the house sold, which prompted a call from the father to invite me to his home for lunch and talk. I accepted, thinking he was going to offer me a deal of some kind based on my past history with him. He basically told me that he had been over the years screwed out of money by different people, and that it was something that I was going to have to learn to live with. My response? I've been screwed out of money that people owe me as well, just not by anyone I considered a friend. I left his house determined to stick it to him. On May 5th, 2009, I started a spray foam insulation company with the same level of equipment that he had, but about a year less experience than he had. On May 7th, I got a call from the father asking a landscape question, acting as if we were on normal terms. My response was, "Oh, I don't landscape anymore, I spray foam." He asked, "What are you talking about?" When I explained to him that I was operating a spray foam insulation company, he ended the phone call rather quickly. I then received a phone call from his son 5 minutes later, who had ignored my calls for the last many weeks, threatening me that he would destroy my hopes of making it as an insulator, and that no little landscaper would make it in this community. A side note, with my newly formed company, there were now approximately 5 companies in the Pacific Northwest performing this kind of service. It is a small circle of people in the insulation world, and the word gets around pretty quickly about who does what, etc. Our very first job was handed to us by our material supplier, which happened to be his supplier, and that job was a fix. Apparently, that very first job we had worked on, the plastic surgeon's house, was insulated incorrectly and had poor workmanship. Luckily, my only involvement in that house was prep work and clean up. We ended up removing all of the insulation and reinstalling it, which amounted to about a $65,000 job. The owner of the house turned around and sued my old boss for it, and won. We then acquired the government contract at Fort Lewis that he had due to poor communication on his part. Anyway, we systematically took apart his company by being better and honest with people. The story spread in the spray foam insulation world, and we became somewhat hero-like in this region because they had screwed over so many people. Oh, and at that time, if you might remember, the housing market took a giant dump, and guess who had 4 very large houses sitting out there that couldn't sell? Yep, the father who ended up going bankrupt by mid-2009. The son, on the other hand, kept his head above water somehow a bit longer. But in October of 2009, I got a call from a repo man asking if I knew the son and where to find his spray foam equipment. My father-in-law happened to be a retired cop and PI, and I put him on the case to find said equipment. 2 days later, he called with the address and specific location of the equipment, which was behind a barn on an island with the tires aired down. I made the call to the repo man, and 2 hours later, he called me from his lot as he was pulling in with a very large trailer behind his truck, asking where he could send the bounty check. I kept the insulation business for about 3 years before being bought out by another company. I also kept the landscape company and still run it to this day. The moral of the story is landscapers may work in the dirt and seem simple, but piss one off, and they will ruin you. The next one is a petty revenge story. I recently started working in an office. I'm not very happy about it as I prefer working from home, but it's only temporary, so I'm hanging in there. Since I'm trying to save money, I bring my own lunch instead of eating at one of the many restaurants near the office. Soon after I started, I noticed my food going missing from the break room. After digging a bit, I discovered who the culprit was. One of my co-workers, let's call him M, decided it was okay to take my lunch without asking for almost a week. I had to put a stop to this, but since I had no hard evidence like a video of him eating my stuff, I decided to take justice into my own hands. You see, M is a Muslim and apparently very serious about it, to the point that he has to let everyone know about this at least once a day. There's nothing wrong with being serious about your religion, mind you. But when everyone knows you as the Muslim guy because that's the only thing you talk about, you may want to diversify your interests. To me, however, he's known as the lunch looter. Since it's my lunch after all, and I have absolutely no dietary prohibitions, I decided to prepare myself a delicious pork sandwich. Pepperoni, ham, smoked sausage, chorizo, bacon, pork leg, cochinita, and even some chicharron for good measure. Oh, and don't forget extra jalapenos. Normally I don't like them, but I want this one to pack a punch. I call it the Squealing Supreme. Surely any person who adheres to religious rules would be a fool to even go near my succulent sandwich, right? Well, it seems like M is the type of person to grab food from the fridge without checking it first, which led to hilarious results. At some point before my lunch hour, the office was set off by bloody screams coming from the break room. When someone ran off to check, they found poor M crying about eating pork and saying that someone put non-halal meat in the fridge. This was my cue to get HR involved. This level of drama wouldn't go unnoticed anyway, and catching M eating my sandwich was all I needed to get them on my side. Sadly, the payoff wasn't great. He was let off with a warning, and his excuse for taking my lunch is that I always brought halal food, basically just chicken and vegetables. So he took it. It's not that he thought it was for him, he just said he targeted my stuff because I was the only one bringing clean food. He was still quite pissed, and in the last few days he's been giving me the death glare. Morale of the story: don't take people's food. Who knows? Maybe they enjoy the food your religion considers sinful. The next one is an entitled people story. This happened about 10 years ago. I was 22 at the time and had to have knee surgery to clear out shredded cartilage about a week after my birthday. This story takes place 3 days after the surgery. My mom, a nurse important for later, My husband, BF of 2 years at the time, and my best friend decided to take me shopping to try to get my mind off the surgery and to pick up craft supplies so I wouldn't be bored while off work. I should mention it was an orthopedic surgery, so I didn't need to use crutches if I didn't feel the need and should be walking some. When we got to the craft store, not our first stop, my husband and best friend made me use one of the store's wheelchairs. I was being stubborn because I could still walk, just not very fast or as long without breaks. Since I really didn't want to be in the chair, my husband and friend decided to make a game out of it, like who could push me the fastest. Now, you might think we were wrong, but let me state this was in the middle of the day on a Monday, so the store was not busy, and my husband and best friend would check the aisle to make sure the coast was clear. After one of the speeding events, I was looking at something in an aisle, and my mom pulled my husband and best friend away to look at something. It was something she thought I would like and was going to get it as a surprise. Well, I decided I didn't want whatever it was that I was looking at and stood up to put it back. This is when Karen appears, berating me for using the wheelchair as a toy and how there are people who actually need it. I calmly explained that I just had surgery and that is why I am using it. She then goes on and on about how she saw what my friends were doing and that I am obviously lying. I explained that they were trying to make me feel better, and I would tell them to push me normally from now on. This did not appease Karen, and she is still berating me. At this point, I roll up my pant leg and show her the compression bandages I am still wearing. She goes on about how that means nothing, and I could have just wrapped my knee as an excuse in case we were caught, and she bet the other people with me also have their knees wrapped. My group returns at this point and says the same thing as me. Karen is still not having it, and we are all lying. I look at my mom and ask if I can take off my bandages, as they were supposed to be removed the next day. She says I really shouldn't, but she could rewrap it for me if needed. At this point, I take off the bandages before anyone can stop me, showing Karen my knee in all its post-surgery glory. It was bruised, swollen, and crusty at the incision sites, and you could still see the iodine on my skin. Karen's face goes white and she looks like she is going to be sick. She starts stammering about how I didn't need to go that far. As my mom is rewrapping my knee, scolding me and Karen under her breath, I look at Karen and say, "What else did you want me to do? I told you, they told you, I showed you the bandages. You wouldn't get off your high horse and insisted we were lying." At this point, a staff member comes to check if we need any help, and Karen runs for the door. We had a pleasant rest of our day, and stopped for ice cream on the way home. The next one is an entitled people story. So this happened a few years ago. For some context, I was a 22-year-old, F. Though I do have a baby face and could pass for 16, 17 years old easily. I had a Yamaha motorbike, 125cc, meaning it could easily go 70 miles per hour. My dad raced motocross and I've been riding bikes my whole life. He taught me all the road rules and safety do's and don'ts, so one day I'm riding to visit my uncle who lived in the middle of nowhere and the roads there are all 50 miles per hour and have extreme bends, and on each side of the road is a massive ditch. I'm going 55 miles per hour, only slowing when the bends are bad. Cue a Karen with 3 kids, all under 10, in the back, tailing me. And I mean tailing within a couple of feet to the back of my bike. I speed up to ignore her, and she pulls her minivan to the side of me and tries to force me to the edge of the road, which is just a ditch. I slow and let her pass, my heart racing as I barely keep my bike upright. You'd think this is where it ends, right? Nope. I was maybe a few miles from my uncle's at this point and have to go through a village high street to get there. As I'm going through, I see Karen. Her minivan is blocking the street, and she's standing with her door open in the road, her arms out as she tries to stop me and force me off the road. I just managed to get past her as onlookers were yelling at her to stop. I go the last few streets to my uncle's and stop down the road, parking my bike and taking my helmet off. With a screech, Karen's minivan pulls up in front of me, and she runs towards me, screaming, "What the duck is wrong with you? Don't you know how to drive?" When I just stare at her, she screeches again. "Only cars can drive on the road. Bikes have to drive on the side or pavement." Yeah, nope. That's so wrong. That thing can't go fast enough to be on the road. You should have pulled over when I told you to. I'm going to report you. At this point, I see my uncle coming outside, his eyes shifting between the Karen and me. Now, something to know about my uncle and me is that we are crazy close. Both pranksters. Also, my uncle is 6 feet tall and not a small man. So without skipping a beat, I put on a fake sad face and run to him screaming in a terrified voice. Daddy, this lady tried to grab me off my bike and followed me home. Where I live, you can get a provisional license before 18, meaning I could have been a minor. Trying not to laugh, my uncle puffs up his chest and yells out at the woman who had run after me and was now behind us. You followed my little girl home? She's a child. Karen's face went white, and I swear she looked like she had crapped herself as she tried to defend herself, only for my uncle to interrupt her. As loud as he could, making sure every nosy neighbor had come out, he screams, What are you, some kind of pervert? I'm calling the police. Without blinking, Karen runs for her car, speeding off with 3 confused-looking kids in the back. As soon as Karen was out of view, I told my uncle what happened, and we both laughed as we went inside to see my aunt laughing, as she had watched the whole thing through the window. Update. Okay, so just for clarification, I didn't have a camera as this was years ago, when they costed a lot more than now. And yes, I could have pulled over and called the police, but I was on the bike, and my phone was in my backpack, so I would have had to stop, get my bag off, and grab it. And if you've used bike gloves, you know it's not possible to use a phone with them. I had no intention of stopping, spending all that time, and giving her the opportunity to run for me. As for the police afterwards, I was just happy she had ducked off. The next one is an entitled parent story. I told my dad I wanted my mom's best friend to walk me down the aisle because my mom's best friend has been more of a dad to me than my biological father. He blew up at me saying he was the one who raised me, not my mom's best friend, and that it was his right to walk me down the aisle. He started calling me and my fiancé slurs. My fiancé is Mexican and I am queer, and even threatened to assault my fiancé. He had already insisted I was gay and trans because my fiancé brainwashed me with his democratic views, when my fiancé isn't a Democrat and had nothing to do with my identity. He kept saying I needed to grow up, and that it was his right to walk me down the aisle as my dad, claiming he did his best for me. So I pointed out that he sat by while I was beaten, starved, and verbally abused by my first stepmother. He then stayed with the second stepmom after she tried to strangle me until the cops made him leave her. He also refused to come to the birth of my nephew/his grandson unless he could bring stepmom number 2, despite her assaulting my sister. I highlighted all the abuse and neglect he put me through growing up, and he still insisted he should walk me down the aisle, even though he doesn't approve of my fiancé because my fiancé isn't white. I uninvited him from the wedding, and am going to try to get a restraining order against him. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never anticipated the dramatic turn my life would take when I returned from visiting my family overseas. The trip was filled with precious moments spent with my aging parents, and as a responsible homeowner, I had made all necessary arrangements to ensure the security of my property during my absence. Little did I know that my neighbor's seemingly harmless favor of collecting my mail would lead to a shocking and intrusive discovery. Let me provide some context. I reside in a different country from my family, making occasional visits to spend cherished moments with them. Knowing the importance of these reunions and the limited time we had together, I wanted to avoid any regrets of neglecting my loved ones. Therefore, I entrusted my neighbor with the task of picking up my mail while I was away, a small favor that he gladly accepted. We had always maintained a cordial relationship, often sharing snacks and enjoying barbecues during the sweltering summer months by the pool I had built in my backyard. Now, I must address the incident that shattered our amicable rapport and drove me to scream at him, banishing him from my property forever. Having managed to secure a morning flight home, I promptly notified my neighbor, expecting his customary prompt reply. To my surprise, there was an uncharacteristic silence from his end, which struck me as peculiar given his constant attachment to his phone. Hours later, as the sun began its descent, a strange noise emanated from my backyard, alerting me to a presence I hadn't anticipated. Peering through the window, I was confronted with a bewildering sight that awakened a fiery mix of fury and disgust within me. My neighbor, alongside a group of friends, reveled in my pool, their nudity flaunted shamelessly. To make matters worse, my backyard furniture had become a makeshift lounge, littered with empty beer cans. Overwhelmed by a cocktail of anger and repulsion, I confronted my neighbor, who undoubtedly realized the gravity of his transgression. Yet, in a feeble attempt to justify his behavior, he shamelessly claimed that it was a mere gathering to beat the heat, akin to when he brought his children over for a quick dip. I vehemently rejected his flimsy comparison, highlighting the obvious disparity between his children's innocent swims and a horde of naked strangers defiling my sanctuary. As some of the guests began to comprehend the gravity of their intrusion and hastily departed, I surmised that my neighbor had misled them, falsely asserting that he had obtained my permission or that I would remain oblivious to their escapade. Enraged, I confronted him once more, asserting my rights as the property owner and demanding that he never set foot on my premises again. Threatening to involve the police if necessary, I made it unequivocally clear that any trespassing would be met with swift retribution. Still reluctant to leave, my neighbor forced my hand, compelling me to resort to dousing him with a hose until he finally retreated from my property. The cleanup that followed was burdensome, but I preferred the arduous task over allowing him to linger on my premises for another second. As for my mail, I never retrieved it, confident that if anything truly important had arrived, the sender would have contacted me again. The loss of a few coupons seemed trivial compared to the invasion of my privacy. This incident shook my confidence in leaving my home unattended during future trips. Thankfully, I secured a backup plan for my next journey. A trusted friend agreed to house sit, and I compensated her accordingly, ensuring the refrigerator was stocked and she had access to all necessary amenities. Furthermore, I installed an additional surveillance camera in my backyard, a failsafe to catch any potential repeat offenders. Instructing my friend on how to contact the authorities should my neighbor attempt a similar audacious act, I armed her with the knowledge of accessing the footage. Part of me hoped that my neighbor would respect the boundaries and refrain from any further transgressions for the sake of his family. Yet, another part of me yearned for justice to prevail, perhaps with the law intervening to demonstrate the severity of his actions. Moreover, I couldn't help but envision the uncomfortable conversation he would have to engage in with his wife and children, explaining why their access to my refreshing pool had been abruptly revoked. The next one is a pro-revenge story. A good friend of mine inherited his grandparents' house about 4 years ago. He decided to live there temporarily while he figured out what to do with the property. Since he grew up in that house, he didn't want to sell it. Less than a week after he moved in, he received a visit from a neighborhood committee. They introduced themselves as the 3 board members of the Homeowners Association and asked him to sign his membership papers. They were extremely nosy and rude. One of them even tried to enter his garage without asking. When my friend stopped him and asked where he wanted to go, the board member had the audacity to say, "I need to check your garage to ensure everything is in order. I have the right to do this every 2 weeks, and denying me access is an offense that will result in a fine." Fed up with their audacity, he kicked them out of the house. While doing so, one of the board members shoved some papers into his face and demanded that he sign them immediately. Those papers were supposed to be signed before moving in, and my friend had already been living there for a week. Once they were gone, he took a look at the papers. They were ridiculous, granting the Homeowners Association unreasonable rights. For example, the Homeowners Association had the right to visit your home every 2 weeks, inspecting the garage to ensure it wasn't used for storage, and checking for gasoline or gas containers. They required the lawn to be mowed every week, and demanded snow to be shoveled every 2 hours during snowfall, starting at 5 o'clock in the morning. They also prohibited parking more than 1 car on the property, except inside the garage, and had numerous other unreasonable rules. A few days later, the board members returned and asked why he hadn't signed the papers yet. They also wanted to check the garage again. This time, he didn't allow them entry and made it clear that he would never become a member of their club. To them, this meant war. Within a week, they sent him fines totaling over $1,000, with several fines specifically for denying them access to his home, each worth $250. However, my friend didn't take them seriously and used their letters as kindling for his grill. Then came the day when they went way too far. He returned home and found one of the board members had broken into his garage, standing inside and writing things down on a notepad. But that wasn't the worst part. They were in the process of taking down his 2 magnificent oak trees in front of the house. Those trees had been planted by his great-grandparents when they were newlyweds and moved into the house. The Homeowners Association had called in a professional crew for this purpose. One of the trees was already severely damaged, reduced to just a stump. They had just begun working on the other one. He couldn't contain his anger. He ordered the tree crew to stop immediately and explained to them that he was the owner, and what they were doing was highly illegal. They had no idea because the board member claimed the trees violated the rules, alleging that too many leaves from the trees fell into the neighbor's garden. My friend informed them that it wasn't a legal reason to cut down the trees, but the board member insisted that my friend had given his consent because the trees violated the homeowners association's rules. Later, my friend looked it up and discovered that they actually had a bylaw stating that if a garden produced more than one 40-liter sack of leaves within 2 weeks, the garden owner had to remove the offending trees within 2 weeks. He informed them that he would overlook their trespassing if they agreed to be witnesses in court. Then he called the police on the board members for trespassing and breaking and entering. They had used bolt cutters to gain access to the garage, which he had always kept secured with a large bike lock after their previous attempts to break in. The legal process must have been glorious. Not only did they have to reimburse him for the lock and the tree, which was worth a significant amount, over $50,000 if I remember correctly, but they also had to pay damages for the second tree. He had a professional arborist tend to it to ensure proper healing, which alone cost over $1,000. However, these idiots actually believed the trial would be unfair and tried to fight it, which likely cost them an additional $10,000 to $15,000 in legal fees and court costs. In total, this trial must have cost them over $120,000. Afterwards, my friend went to another civil court and sued them for emotional damages. He emphasized how much those trees meant to him, planted by his great-grandparents with seeds from their home country. He painted a vivid picture and also expressed feeling threatened by the homeowners association, making it difficult for him to sleep as he constantly feared their attempts to access his house. The court bought his arguments and awarded him $500,000, in addition to the costs of a state-of-the-art alarm system to help him feel safe in his own home once again. In total, he cost the homeowners association nearly $750,000. They were forced to file for bankruptcy, and an individual was appointed to audit their finances so that my friend could recover his money. The best part is yet to come. The mediator discovered that these 3 individuals had been defrauding the homeowners association for over 10 years, using fines as a means to supplement their income. All 3 had to sell their houses to pay my friend. Now, he is one of the most popular residents, constantly receiving invitations for barbecues and other events. You see, most people never wanted the homeowners association in the first place. However, the board members practically coerced them into signing the contract, claiming it was not optional. They threatened a $500 fine for failing to sign before moving in. Out of over 50 members, only 6 actually wanted the homeowners association. People suspect that those 6 members got a share of the action as a reward for spying on their neighbors and reporting violations. The next one is a petty revenge story. My parents rent a house on a 1/4 acre of land. The land with rows of grapes is not being rented to my parents, but the landlord lets us pick them and juice them every year. The only access to the grapes is through the land my parents rent. Before my parents moved in, this old lady, Maureen, used to pick the grapes with her family and juice them. As a side note, Maureen has her own grapes, but she likes to use our landlord's grapes too because previous tenants did not. Every year it's a battle to make Maureen wait to pick grapes so we can pick a share. The landlord has been clear that we get first dibs on the grapes because we're his actual tenants. We always leave her at least a row, 1 of 4. Every year she tries to be a sneaky little person and get the grapes, but this year was the worst. My mom told Maureen that she was going to pick the grapes this weekend. Well, this weekend came and went without being able to pick grapes. My mom's helper crew got sick. My dad was recovering from major surgery, and she couldn't find the time or energy. Maureen's crotchety old self calls to inform my mom that she is coming tomorrow to pick all the grapes we didn't. My mom asked her to please wait a few more days as her husband, my dad, has cancer and her helpers were sick. Maureen's response: "That's too bad. You had your chance. My family is coming tomorrow and we are picking the grapes." Of course, my poor mom loses it at this point and begins screaming, "Shame on you, Maureen! You call yourself a Christian!" Maureen continues telling her she had her chance. So my mom came in and told me this story. I said, "Absolutely not. We are staying up as late as needed to pick every single grape off the vines. Every single one. We both called as many friends as we could. The troops are being gathered. We now have about 10 people to help us pick the grapes. We will pick every single grape so that when Maureen and her family show up, there will not be one little fruit left on the vine." All-nighter for the grapes. Update. Oh my wow. Okay, well, I love how many of you would help pick grapes. It makes me feel bad about the fact that the update isn't super satisfying. Maureen called my mom last night, an hour or so into picking, to apologize and said we could have all the grapes. My mom, being a much better person than I am, Told her she can still have a row or two because we didn't need all the grapes. But Maureen kept saying no, and that she won't come by at all. Ironically, it almost sounded like she was throwing a fit about it. Like, we're being nice and still letting you come. So we did pick grapes, but not everything. We still hate Maureen. Apparently she's 92 and she believes she will live forever because of her homemade grape juice. So that's one reason she's so crazy about this whole thing. Maybe she will live forever, but that would be unfortunate because she's an a-hole. The next one is an entitled people story. Not long ago, I posted about how my brother went out of his way to follow me when I tried to go camping alone. Him and that crazy vehicle he calls the mini ram that he made by cutting up a minivan and adding all sorts of other mods. My brother has stolen beer from me before on previous camping trips because he and his friends always drink too much and never buy enough. And when he followed me to my camping spot with his own camper a couple of weeks prior, he tried to steal a six-pack from my fridge and acted like a big baby when I made him give it back. So I thought up this little gem of an idea. But it was no easy feat, as my brother will drink just about any beer, so long as it gets him drunk. To try and find a beer that was truly nasty, I started asking around and buying different brands. After a couple of weeks, I hit pay dirt. I won't say the brand name of the beer, but it was bad. There was so much hop to the flavor that it made me shudder every time I took a swig. I could barely finish one bottle without puking because it made me gag so much. So this stuff was perfect. Also, I know some people really like that kind of overly hoppy beer. I'm not trying to offend, but to me it was just horrid. I started openly talking about going camping again in my favorite area, and getting my friends to join in. My brother easily got wind of this and decided he wanted to go camping too. He showed up with his mini ram and camper about 2 hours after I'd gotten to the campsite. Only this time he didn't try to park next to me, and instead went to the next spot about 100 yards further down the road. My friends and I partied it up in our own way, played music, danced like idiots around a fire, played stupid games, all the usual. And knowing my brother, he and his friends would run out of beer at some point and try to mooch off us because they have no concept of drinking in moderation. They didn't bother us on Friday night, but on Saturday night around 1 or 2 a.m., my brother hobbled over asking for beer. We all just ignored him like he wasn't there, which made him get an attitude. One of my friends brought his big cooler and was keeping all our good beer and food in it, and we kept the cooler near us or locked in my truck at all times. Inside my camper, I left 2 full 6-packs of that horrid beer in the mini fridge. My brother just grabbed them and walked away. He acted like he was being sneaky, but seeing a drunk man act like he was invisible was just hilarious. About a half hour later, my brother came hobbling back and looking sick. He started demanding to know what was in the beer I bought. I started asking him what he meant because I didn't give him any beer. He looked flustered for a moment and then finally just said he took some beer from my camper. I asked if it was the brew, and he said yes. I laughed and said that stuff was crap, and he could have it. I even pulled out another 6-pack that was minus the one I drank when I tested the beer and tried to hand it to him. He looked like he wanted to throw up at the sight of it and left. Then, just to be extra petty, my friends and I snuck over to his campsite after a little while and left the remaining 6-pack on top of his cooler. He and his friends were all wasted and actually still drinking the nasty beers I tricked them into stealing, and their faces all showed how bad it was. Every time one of them took a swig, it was followed by RBF, but they were so drunk that they probably wouldn't even notice there was more of that same beer. My friends and I watched from nearby as they kept drinking and making sour faces. My brother eventually puked on himself and then ran into the river to get the vomit off himself. He threw up some more in the water. It wasn't a pretty sight. Even though we could barely see him in the dark, we could still hear him. He repeatedly threw up with his face in the water and made loud gurgle noises, then cursed my name over and over again. That's when we finally had enough of watching them. I didn't see my brother or his 2 friends again until well into the afternoon. They were all badly hungover, and despite how much they drank, they couldn't forget that nasty beer they had the night before, especially since the bottles were littered all over the ground. My brother actually demanded I apologize, and I just laughed and said, "You actually want me to apologize to you for stealing beer from me?" And then we all started laughing at him. He left humiliated, and we didn't interact again. I drove home before he did this time, and he's not spoken about what happened to our parents, and I've heard nothing from mutual friends. I guess this time he wants to keep his humiliation a secret. I think next time I'll get some beer spiked with a laxative to leave for him. That might be funny. The next one is an entitled parent story. A very good friend of mine recently got on a plane with her 3 boys, 8, 9, and 10, by herself to visit Grandma for a month over summer vacation. I was on transport duty because driving to and from the airport is a young man's game, and also I love spending time with my homies. There was an accidental on-purpose scheduling issue. Namely, my friend wanted a day in a hotel to recuperate from the flight with her 3 boys before her mom starts driving her insane. Husband is coming up in a few weeks because he just started a new job and can't just be like, back in a month. So I snatch all 4 people and luggage from the airport and give them a lift to the hotel. All 3 boys are bouncing off the walls and my friend just needs a nap. So, hotel pool time. She's posted up under an umbrella and is dead to the world. I'm in the pool with the boys. We started off playing Marco Polo and then had to get creative once other folks were in the pool as well. Eventually, we settled on a game called Not Done Yet. Basically, I'm standing on one side of the steps out of the pool, and when the boys feel like it, they try and leave the pool. I decide if they're done or not yet using a complicated examination process that amounts to picking the kid up, giving them a bit of a shake, faking a big sniff, saying, "Not done yet," and yeeting them back into the pool. Obviously, if someone's waterlogged or actually wants out, I won't stop them, but typically there's giggling and a bit of a cue for inspection, so the game continues. I get a workout, they get tired out, everybody wins. Then a new player enters the playing field in the form of a very sweet-looking girl, approximately 6 years old, wearing water wings. She asks if she can play too. I say of course she can, but she needs to ask whoever is watching her first, so I know it's okay with everyone. She says, "Okay," and exits the pool. I'm keeping an eye on where she's going so I can smile and give the "I'm not a creep" wave to whoever's minding the kid. Only she doesn't run to one of the adults on the lounge chairs. She runs back into the hotel dripping wet. She disappears inside and comes back down about 5 minutes later and says, "Mommy says it's okay." Only she's not the type of kid who lies without batting an eye and is obviously fibbing. I ask if she really did, and the little girl says, well, Mommy was busy, so I think it's okay." It's at this point that the proverbial record scratches, and my inner monologue says, "What?" I summon the oldest of the boys from the waterborne shenanigans and ask him to go wake up his mom so she can keep an eye on things for a minute. I need to go take care of something. While he's bearding the dragon in her den, I crouch down and tell the little girl, "We need to go inside and find an adult because it's not okay that you're in the pool all by yourself, okay? You didn't do anything wrong, but you've got some growing to do before you can be in the pool all by yourself, okay?" At this point, the oldest homie has awoken the mom, and she's now looking at me with a "what the crap" look on her face. I mouth "later" at her, and then take the little girl's hand and bring her to the concierge desk of the hotel. I explain the situation with the little girl to the concierge, whose face goes from confusion to pained before giving the girl a smile and thanking me for bringing this to his attention. The concierge guy takes responsibility for the girl, and I go back out to the pool to explain what had happened to my friend. She was livid on the little girl's behalf, but mostly just wanted to resume her nap. Conveniently at that time, the middle homie had gotten out of the pool and was making faces at us while we were talking. I told my friend to get some sleep. I'll watch the boys. Then the middle homie got spear-tackled back into the water because actions have consequences. Maybe 20 minutes to half an hour later, once I was starting to run out of steam, I sensed a disturbance in the force. A rather irate woman wearing a blouse that was inside out was dragging the little girl from before out to the pool area and demanding to know who told her she couldn't swim. The little girl, who was now silent with tears on her cheeks and a pathetically deflated water wing, pointed at me. I was instructed to get my ass out of the pool and explain myself. Why on earth was it so hard to watch an extra child while she got some adult time to herself? Why did I insist on ruining her first chance to get away from it all in months? Her little girl is an angel and is no trouble to watch, blah blah blah. I explained that it wasn't a good idea to leave a little one in a pool with no adult supervision, pointing to a number of signs about no lifeguard on duty, all children must be accompanied by an adult, etc., etc. The inside-out lady is getting steadily more belligerent, explaining like I'm slow that her daughter knows how to swim and was wearing floaties and would have been fine. She's getting more and more in my face, trying to act like I'm just the worst for ruining everything. And then player 3 enters the fight. It's my friend, and she's fresh out of fluffs to give. She starts reading Inside Out Lady the Riot Act, demanding to know how she could be so stupid and irresponsible, and how dare she try to act like I'm the bad guy here. Inside Out Lady opens her mouth to reply and just gets steamrolled. "Just look at your daughter, see what you've done?" appeared to finally get through to the woman because she looks down at her daughter, then back up to my friend. There's a flicker of shame on her face, and then it's all rage, and she swung. I'm not ashamed to admit that stepping between those two without backup seemed like a poor life choice. I stopped the boys before they could get caught in the crossfire, told them to take a step back, and when several hotel employees came out to break up the fight, I stepped in. I grabbed my friend and pulled her back, while two guys from the hotel grabbed the other woman. The combatants are separated and the police are called. My friend and I are back at her lounge chair with a large first aid kit the hotel staff gave us while the boys hover and make sure Mom's okay. She's sporting a magnificent shiner from that first punch and a couple of other scrapes and bruises, but mostly seems livid that she got cold-clocked like that. The police arrive and get the story from everyone even tangentially involved. We wind up being asked to provide contact information to the police. My friend declines a checkover by an EMT saying she's fine, just sore. The story Inside Out lady provided didn't match up at all with what the hotel cameras showed, and she got some shiny bracelets put on her before getting shoved in the back of a squad car. My friend said she would be delighted to press charges for assault, and was told the police would be in touch. Once the police were satisfied, it was definitely time to retreat to the hotel room. I got dressed and left for the evening after making sure everybody was okay, and on the way out I asked one of the front desk folks what happened with the woman and her daughter. The woman was arrested and the girl's father came to get her. They couldn't give me any more information than that. Hope she's okay.
The next one is an entitled people story.
Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. As the sun set over the quiet neighborhood, tensions brewed between Karen, my entitled neighbor, and myself. Her audacity to repeatedly park her car in my driveway had reached its boiling point. Determined to reclaim what was rightfully mine, I devised a plan to outwit her. Little did I know this confrontation would escalate into a dangerous game of survival. With my husband away at work, I seized the opportunity to take action. Instead of confronting Karen directly, I decided to block my driveway with cement blocks whenever our car wasn't parked there. I hoped this would dissuade her from her selfish parking habits. Unfortunately, it only fueled her fury. One fateful day, I spotted Karen maneuvering her car, deliberately parking it in the middle of my front yard. Consumed by indignation, I rushed outside, my anger boiling over. Before she could step out of her vehicle, I confronted her, my voice laden with frustration. "Get your car off of my yard now!" I demanded, my words echoing through the tense air. Karen, unyielding in her entitlement, retorted, "This is what you get from blocking me from the driveway. You should let me park there." Infuriated, I responded, "The driveway belongs to me and my husband, not you." Defiantly, Karen proclaimed, "There is no way I am parking my car in the street when I can use your driveway. If you want to make things difficult, I will leave my car here." Frustration turned into resolve as I issued my final warning. "This is your last chance. If I see your car on my property again, I am calling to have it towed away. I refuse to play this game with you any longer." Enraged by my ultimatum, Karen started her car, appearing to acquiesce. However, as she reversed, she suddenly shifted gears, accelerating towards me. Instinctively, I leaped out of harm's way as her vehicle narrowly missed me. Shocked and trembling, I realized the extent of Karen's unhinged nature. She was willing to go to great lengths, even attempting to take my life, to assert her entitlement. Shaken, I immediately dialed my husband at work, his reassuring voice urging me to remain inside while he rushed home. In the brief period between Karen's vicious attack and my husband's arrival, she left a note by our door, a chilling reminder of her malevolence. The message threatened further harm if I dared to challenge her again. Fear gripped my heart, but as the next day dawned, I witnessed the audacity of Karen's actions. The cement blocks that once guarded my driveway had vanished, replaced by her car arrogantly occupying the space. Enough was enough. Determined to reclaim my peace, I made the difficult decision to have her car towed. An hour later, Karen arrived at my doorstep, accompanied by the police. She spewed false accusations, claiming she had rented the spot and that I had illegally towed her car. Desperate to defend my position, I pleaded with the officers to hear my side away from her vitriolic presence. Exhibiting the evidence, including the threatening note and the damaged grass from her attempt to run me over, I painted a clear picture of her escalating hostility. The police, recognizing Karen's baseless claims, arrested her to restore order and defuse the situation. Despite her relentless protests, justice prevailed. I felt a flicker of relief, knowing that the authorities understood the truth and sided with me. In the days that followed, Karen begrudgingly retrieved her car but found herself parking it on the street, defeated in her attempts to seize my driveway. News of her behavior spread, and even other neighbors refused to tolerate her audacious antics. Still, Karen persisted in defaming my character, attempting to tarnish my reputation at every turn. However, I chose to rise above her slander, knowing that those who believed her baseless lies were not worth my time nor my energy. Undoubtedly, Karen suffered a financial blow from retrieving her car, but she continued to blame me for her misfortune, hurling insults and claims of personal responsibility. I refused to engage her in further conflict, recognizing that her perception of reality would never align with mine. From that day forward, I remained vigilant, keeping a watchful eye on my driveway. If Karen ever dared to encroach upon my property again, I would swiftly summon the tow truck, ensuring she learned her lesson once and for all. No longer would I cower in the face of her entitlement. Instead, I would assert my rights and protect the tranquility of my home, standing strong against Karen's ceaseless attempts to disrupt my life. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I used to do construction work a few years ago and had the coolest manager ever, Thomas. Thomas had this next-door neighbor, Alan, who he couldn't stand. Alan would steal stuff from Thomas's yard, like gardening tools, lumber, and most importantly, dirt. Both Thomas and Alan had been growing vegetables in their backyards for years, and apparently, Alan had been stealing dirt from Thomas for years. Thomas, being a very non-confrontational guy, let it slide. One day at one of the job sites, they delivered a large amount of soil. You could climb those piles of soil. Thomas figured they wouldn't miss a few bucketfuls of dirt, and the general contractor on site didn't care either. So we started helping Thomas load up some buckets in the back of the truck. We loaded 8 buckets, and then he said to me, "Hold on, I need one more for Alan." I thought it was really nice of him to think about his neighbor. However, he was actually planning to leave the bucket out for Alan to steal instead of taking the dirt from his garden. That's when he told me about Alan and his thieving ways. Jokingly, I said, "You should take that tub of plant killer, I don't know what this stuff is called, you have and pour it over the fence. Screw him in his garden." Unbeknownst to me, the wheels of justice started turning in Thomas's head. He didn't say anything to me, and we finished up the day and went home. About a week later, I showed up at Thomas's house for work. He runs the business from home, and he was grinning to himself the whole morning. Eventually, my curiosity got the better of me, and I had to know what was going on, so I asked him. He broke down his revenge plan step by step. He got home and unloaded his buckets of dirt in his driveway where Alan could see them. Then he proceeded to dump all of them, one by one where he needed them, but he intentionally forgot one bucket. This particular bucket was laced with plant killer. He emptied the entire bottle into the bucket and mixed it in. The best part is that Thomas didn't offer Alan the laced bucket, he just left it out. If Alan had asked for dirt, Thomas would have given him the regular stuff, but instead he chose to be sneaky. Under the cover of darkness, Thomas ran over, grabbed the bucket and took almost all of it, then put it back. After a week, Alan's tomatoes withered and died. So Thomas went to the nursery and bought new plants, but they didn't last more than 2 days before dying. He went back to the nursery, complained, and got more plants for free. A few days later, bam, they were dead again. Every morning, we checked on Alan and his radioactive dirt and quietly laughed to ourselves about what we now called Operation Scorched Earth. The next one is an entitled people story. Several years ago, my brother Dan moved from California to Washington State and built a 3-bedroom house on one of 2 parcels of land he had bought when he was 18 years old. He lived in a nice community with a small lake and had a homeowners association. During the 2008 economic crash, he ran into financial trouble, so we helped him. To repay us for the help, in March of 2016, he came down to California for an extended period to work on our house, which was neglected because of helping him. He was very proficient at renovating houses and did fantastic work. In November, my brother's friend Jake called him and asked if a friend of his, Tuna, could stay in one of the rooms for $400 per month. Dan had worked for many years with Jake doing construction for a house flipper, so he trusted Jake's judgment, needed the money, and thought it might be good to have someone trustworthy there to watch his house. Dan drove back up to Washington, cleaned out a room, put a lock on his bedroom door, locked the door, and put some of his things in a storage area up out of the way in the garage. Tuna seemed nice and gave Dan $400 for the first month. There was never a written rental agreement. It was just verbal and meant to be temporary because Dan was going to return in 6 months. Tuna never sent another payment. We would call and ask her, and she always said it had been sent, but nothing ever arrived. So what was going on at his house? We pieced together that something wrong was going on there after Dan's neighbor called and after questioning Jake. The neighbor complained that the house had turned into a drug house, full of people and cars coming and going all hours of the night. At the beginning of June 2017, Dan drove back to Washington and handed Tuna a 3-day eviction notice. She left, stating that she had somewhere else to live and would get her stuff later. He was allowing her to retrieve her stuff at a later date. He just wanted her out. He started working on repairs and cleaning up the house. I mailed Dan a care package with some clothes, a California-themed shopping bag, and gift cards for gas and food. 5 days later, Tuna showed up with 2 men who punched Dan in the face. They wanted to take the house back by force. Dan went to the neighbor and called the police. The police came, and instead of arresting the men and Tuna, they took Dan to jail for missing a child support court date, which then put a warrant on him. Before coming to California, he thought everything regarding child support back payments for his independent, successful 23-year-old adult child had been taken care of. He had no idea about a court date since they notify by mail, and Tuna had never forwarded his mail, which was one of the things she promised to do. The child support scam on Dan is another issue I will have to submit later. So the police essentially handed the house over to Tuna. She and her cronies went in, changed the locks, and placed a long metal bar across the inside of the garage door so it could not be opened from the outside. They stole the package I sent to Dan and spent the gift cards. Meanwhile, my family and I were on vacation in Hawaii, and I received a phone call from Dan in jail. I spent a whole day of my vacation in the hotel room trying to figure out how to get him out of jail. Bail bonds could not be used for child support cases. Finally, they let him out when I paid a child support payment of $350. He had been in jail for 3 days, and the squatters had dug themselves in, so when he returned to his house, he had to call the police to arrest them for trespassing. After all, Tuna had been evicted, left, and no longer had permission to be there. They were squatters by all accounts, but the state defers to people who just claim they are renting, therefore requiring a landlord to go through the court system to remove the so-called tenants, who are actually squatters. The police came and screwed him over once again. Tuna claimed she was renting the entire house, and the police believed her instead of Dan. She told the policeman that she would leave in 10 days, and the policeman told Dan that he could have his house back in 10 days because Tuna said she would leave by then. Are you kidding me? Dan was instructed to leave the premises or be arrested. It was his house. She was trespassing. He got into his minivan and drove away with nowhere to stay but in his van. Of course, Tuna did not leave after 10 days. Dan went back after 10 days and called the police again. Once again, the police told him to leave or be arrested. We didn't know what to do next. One of the Homeowners Association board members, who had some experience in managing real estate properties, attempted to help us. She said that he needed a 20-day eviction notice, then Tuna would be out, and this had always worked for her when she had to evict tenants. Okay, so the 20-day notice was posted, and we waited. Tuna did not leave. Dan went over to his house and started cleaning up trash strewn all over the yard, waiting for her to leave. Tuna called the police, stating that she was a renter and he was disturbing her. Once again, Dan was asked to leave or be arrested. This time, Dan put his phone on speaker and I heard the whole interaction between him and the police. Yes, he had to leave or be arrested. Dan could not even get his construction tools out of the garage and could not work without his tools. And with being homeless, how do you even work? What was going to happen to all of his possessions? His sentimental things. His room had been broken into long before, his things removed, and people had used the room. It was near the end of summer. We were paying his mortgage payments, and it was getting so hard on everyone. Then something nice happened. A kind friend, Adam, asked him to stay at his house, which Dan did. During this time, Dan worked for Adam with loaned tools, and also went to some landlord-tenant educational meetings. The people at the meetings were helpful and instructed Dan on how to proceed by taking the matter to court. The police would not go further without a court order to physically evict Tuna. It would be difficult to afford the cost to hire a lawyer, but eventually we did end up getting a lawyer. Dan posted a court appearance on the door of his house since Tuna never answered the door, and that is what you do legally in this case. Every time he posted a court appearance, he had to legally give her 1 week's notice, which he did. He showed up at court and Tuna failed to show up. So he won by default, right? Wrong. The judge said that Tuna was not given proper notice because the notice was posted by Dan instead of an anonymous person. Dan walked out of the courtroom. The lawyers from the landlord-tenant meetings were there and couldn't believe it. Unfortunately, Adam had to move out of the house he was renting, so Dan had to go back to living in his van. It was autumn in the Pacific Northwest, and it was getting cold. The police had started harassing him if he slept in his van. We rented motel rooms for Dan. Once while at a motel, Dan heard a knock on the door in the middle of the night. He thought it was the motel staff and opened the door. Two men burst into the room and proceeded to beat the crap out of him to rob him. They broke his finger and gave him a concussion. Dan ran to his van, drove it to a parking lot, and slept. He refused to go back to the motel. Things were starting to go downhill in a very bad way. I found a lawyer from a non-profit who worked for free to help. He actually used that 3-day eviction notice that Dan had given Tuna back in June as a basis for the case. I had found it online, the wording was appropriate, and it had been served properly. The lawyer had to jump through endless hoops and court appearances. The same judge presided over every case that had to do with evictions, and she always favored the tenants, including entitled ones. This took forever, like 3 more months, and Dan became haggard, homeless, sick, depressed, and at times had gone missing. Once I called every hospital, jail, homeless shelter, and even the food bank looking for him. His van was impounded 4 times. He was hospitalized 4 times. He was endlessly hunted down and harassed by the police. 3 times I found him because I was listed as his emergency contact on his state insurance when he showed up at hospitals. While all of this was happening to Dan, my husband was in a serious motorcycle accident, and I had to take care of my husband, changing his dressings, etc. Okay, I'm crying right now. This was so hard to endure, remember, and difficult to write about. I couldn't leave and fly up to Washington to help my brother, but I was doing everything down here to get his house back with the lawyer. I got him motel rooms at other motels when I could. I paid 4 times to get his van out of impound. I sent him cell phones and care packages delivered at UPS stores. One time, Dan was lost and didn't have his van or phone. He ended up at a hospital that contacted me. He told me that he had felt really sick and had gone to the hospital earlier, who released him after examining him, even after he pleaded with them to let him stay because he felt horribly sick. He ended up collapsed on the sidewalk by the Salvation Army shelter, who wouldn't let him in, and another homeless person called 911. So he was back at that hospital with a very serious condition affecting his heart. I told the hospital to please call me at release time so I could arrange a motel for Dan. They didn't. He was then found in a park in frigid weather dressed in a pair of scrubs, a t-shirt, hoodie, and 1 shoe. A city policeman called me and took him to a motel where he stayed a while. I sent a care package there. Dan told me that one time when he was being harassed by the police for cooking food in a park, he mouthed off and told them they were communists, and it was their fault that he was homeless because they gave his house to a squatter. A fire truck arrived, so he was not arrested with the firemen there, but I don't think the police liked him much for saying that. In October, Dan was arrested for drunk driving while he was sleeping in a Walmart parking lot. I had to bail him out of jail over that. Every time he didn't get to court hearings, they would post warrants for his arrest. One time he was in jail, and they refused to give him his medication, so I had to bail him out because he felt so awful. In mid-November, the police arrested Dan again for not showing up to court for that so-called drunk driving incident. He begged me to bail him out. Even though the bail bondsman paid the bail in the late afternoon, the jail released him in the middle of the night, again with no vehicle, impounded, a dead cell phone, no charger, in the van, no money, etc. I found out later that this jail only releases people at night so they can get credit and are paid by the state for the whole day. That night he was released, it was our deceased mother's birthday. Dan was then found unconscious in a ditch by a seawall in a Starbucks parking lot. He had a broken femur, broken hip, cracked spine, a head contusion, and that finger was still broken, from the motel incident. The doctors evaluated that he had been hit in the back of his head with a blunt object. We do not know who did it. The last thing he remembers was a police car driving by. He was airlifted to a major hospital in Seattle, about 50 miles from where he was. I took a flight up to Seattle as soon as I could and visited him. The doctors showed me the x-rays, and he had countless rods and pins put into his body to put him back together. By this time, we were getting closer to having his house back. I went by the house with Adam's brother-in-law, Paul, who was packing heat. We pounded on the door, and I demanded that the squatters hand over my dead mother's rocking chair. The stupid friend Jake was there, and he handed it through the door. It is a big heirloom mission-style chair, and they had burned into the chair in 4 inches letters the word wasted. The court order finally became available, but then we had to schedule the eviction according to when the police had time to do it, which was another 2 weeks. It was scheduled for the beginning of December. I went back home to California briefly and returned the night of the eviction. Dan was in the hospital for almost 2 weeks. When he was released, I arranged a nice long-term stay-type hotel back near home for him to live at until the police evicted the squatters. Paul helped us a lot. He was with the police at the eviction, changed all the locks, and secured the house. He picked up Dan at the hotel, and Dan got to witness the eviction of that entitled idiot from hell. She was the only one left in the house. A notice had been posted on the door to warn everyone to leave, but as usual, she didn't think there would be any reason she would have to leave. It took her completely by surprise. The police pounded on the door and demanded she leave immediately. She asked if she could get this and that, but no, she couldn't. She grabbed her little dog purse and left with nothing else. The police put a notice on the door after Paul secured everything. Dan was driven back to the hotel, and then I arrived. I wish I could have seen the eviction, but couldn't get a flight early enough. The neighbor said that a bunch of people came to the house that night pounding on the door trying to get in, but couldn't. They almost called the police, but the people left. We went over there every day for about a week to clean up. Dan was confined to a wheelchair and was on heavy meds, so it was hard. He couldn't help too much, but did his best. The house was a disaster. There were literally 5 tons of garbage in the yards around the house. The trash disposal service was not activated during this time, so they just piled it up around the house. On one side of the house was a huge pillar of trash made out of wire fencing. It was about 8 feet by 8 feet and at least 12 feet high. The front yard was awful, with several piles of trash about 4 feet high. Tuna left every single thing in the kitchen, in the cupboards, and rotting food in pans. The carpets were soaked in dog pee. There were clothes and junk everywhere. There was loads of crushed glass embedded into the gravel driveway like she wanted us to get flat tires. Over the doorway from the house into the garage was a dangerous booby trap, which literally could have killed someone. It was made out of large, heavy metal clamps with a glass jewelry case teetering on top of the clamps. It could have fallen on top of someone's head if not discovered, and someone jarred it a little. The water had been shut off for months by the homeowners association, because they controlled the well and owned the water system. As soon as you don't pay the homeowners association fees, water is shut off. All the toilets were clogged up with crap. The sewage system was impossible to unclog, and later DB discovered that they had thrown dirt and plastic containers down the pipes. He had to go under the house and disassemble the pipes to get everything out. Hanging up on the wall in plain sight in the master bedroom was the California shopping bag I had mailed to Dan in the package that Tuna had stolen. She hung it there to taunt me. I am not super religious, but I felt the worst kind of evil there and had to pray and debunk the evil spirits from that house. I stayed for weeks there cleaning up and hired some people to do yard cleanup to get the front yard clean. Later, Dan and Adam dealt with the pillar of trash at the side of the house. Every construction tool that belonged to Dan was stolen. He couldn't work much from a wheelchair, but needed the tools to repair his own house. Dan persisted, though. He finally got to the point where he could walk. Now he can't walk for long periods, gets tired easily, but can do things slowly. He has some nice roommates that drive him places and take care of him at times. Many of his tools have been replaced. He sanded off the wasted message on Mom's rocking chair. We have sunk a lot of money into helping him, but what else is one supposed to do? It was a life or death situation. That was his house he had built so many years ago. This was the most wicked thing I have ever encountered. It was coming from all directions. We heard that the creepy squatter died a year later. No one wanted to take her in, and she went from person to person staying wherever. If she would have been decent and kind, she probably could have been a roommate and had a place. But she thought she could just take someone's house. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.